Hi guys, and welcome to another tips and tricks video. Today we're going to be covering when and why you may choose to use the counter-offensive stratagem, also known as the interrupt, because it necessarily isn't as obvious as it may seem. And then we're going to think about a couple of different ways in which you can play around the interrupt so that the enemy can't hurt you as much as they'd like to. So, without further ado, let's crack on. So first of all, let's make sure we know the details of the counter-offensive stratagem. As you'll see here, it says, use this stratagem after an enemy unit has fought this turn. Select one of your own eligible units and fight with it next. Probably the key part here to note is that it says eligible unit. So that's a unit which is in engagement range or a unit that made a charge, which will come up later in our discussion. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So, when would we use the interrupt? Well, the most obvious one is of course because we want to try and kill someone before they kill us. It's not always as simple as that though, so let's just quickly make sure we're considering the following. Firstly, are you getting value out of the 2CP? Do you have any other stratagems to use that could be more important? You might have a very key tactic that you're planning on using and you need the CP elsewhere. CP is obviously a lot harder to come by as the game goes on as well, so you really need to be making sure you get value out of that choice. Next of all, does this interrupt, if it goes right, actually affect the score? Or are you just going to be killing some meaningless unit? Don't just use it for the sake of it. It's also important to note that does the math say what you want to achieve? Will it actually happen? Are you going to be able to put a big enough dent into the unit to achieve your goal? Sometimes we just interrupt and we chip away and then we still die on the fight back and nothing came of it. So make sure you do the maths beforehand just to make sure. And another point is that can the enemy actually hurt you realistically? Maybe you don't need to interrupt. That can quite happen, and you might just need to take the punch. You'll suffer 1 or 2 casualties, but actually you can save the 2CP. The second reason to interrupt, which is something you see far less frequently and yet higher levels of play can be just as important, is to stop the movement of your opponent. If you interrupt and base your opponent, they can no longer pile in and they're not going to gain movement from that, which can of course be key. For example, it could be used to stop your opponent from tagging other units. It could be used to stop them from stealing primary objectives. It could be used to stop them from scoring secondary objectives. So what I want to do now is head down to the battlefield, because now we're going to have a look at a real life example from a battle report we did. So in the example you can see in front of you, I, as the Custodes player, have a choice of interrupting in 2 places. Firstly, I could interrupt in the middle of the board here with my Alaris. And if all goes well, he could kill 3 or 4 of the enemy, which would mean that on the punchback, he's probably not going to die. Alternatively, I could interrupt with my Sagittarum into these bikes. They're right by the deployment zone. These bikes aren't going to kill the Sagittarum. However, my Sagittarum haven't got enough attacks to completely wipe out the bikes, and so therefore be free to shoot next turn. So, in what place do you think I should interrupt? Well, there is something I haven't told you yet, which is my opponent had chosen behind enemy lines. So let's go through the things that I spoke about. If I interrupt here, they could get lucky, or the Alaris could get lucky, but most likely he's only going to kill about 2 troops. And then these guys, say they're Twilight, 3 guys with 15 attacks, that's going to take down the Terminator. So actually that doesn't gain me anything. However, if I choose to interrupt here, I now get to pile in. So what I would do is I would base. Now then, when it comes to my opponent's turn to fight, of course, let's say I've killed one of the bikes, okay? this one still cannot pile in, which means if this one comes around to here, my opponent is still not scoring behind enemy lines. So as you can see here, it's really important to think about using your basing to try and stop movement. Many opponents will try this sort of thing. They'll come out here, they'll be kind of here, they'll then pile in around to here, around to here, around to here, then they get to consolidate. And if I've piled in so that now this is closer than that one, I can come around to here, can come around to here, can come around to here. And suddenly I've gained a lot of movement. So it's really important, as I said, to think about that. And what is your opponent hoping to achieve? Things like behind enemy lines are quite easy to stop if you think ahead. And this is one of those situations where you would really want to be thinking ahead. In the game, I made the wrong choice. I got greedy, first of all. And also I banked on the fact that my opponent, Tom, hadn't seen that play. Of course, he had seen that play. So I interrupted over here. It was into incubi in the real life game, and I barely killed any. And then sure enough, I died to the incubi. And he got his 3 points on behind enemy lines. So it all went wrong. So yeah, think about that when you are interrupting. Have they got a plan for their movement? And if so, can you stop it? There's a good example on another battle report we did in which I played into Tom with my Harlequins into his GSE. I sent forward my troops to try and get into his deployment zone with pile-ins and consolidates, because Twilight Harlequins get 5 inches on that. And Tom very cleverly interrupted to base me. He knew he wasn't going to kill me because these were the days where we had a 4-up invuln, but he based me to stop me from getting that movement, knowing I didn't have enough attacks to drop all the way through. And so that sort of clever play which you will encounter at a much higher level. So, are there any ways of preventing the effectiveness of the interrupt? Well, I'm going to give you 2 ways here. Although be warned, they require using 2 separate units. So, for this first example, let's remember that we can only fight if we are in engagement range, which is 1 inch, or if we are within half an inch of a model that is within half an inch of the enemy. So, what we can do is charge an enemy unit with 2 units, one that is more of a sacrificial unit and one that is going to dish out the pain. So in this example, I've got a naked 5-man unit who aren't going to do a huge amount into the Space Marines. And then I've also got my Troop Master, the big scary guy that obviously causes a whole world of hurt. And what I'm going to do with my charge, so I roll my dice, and I'm going to base as many as I can. So let's say I roll a good number. I can come in here and I can base, 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 and let's say base here. Then I'm moving my Troop Master to here. Now, if my opponent chooses to interrupt, they're only really going to be able to engage the 5-man. This model, this model, this model, and this model, they cannot move. They are not near the Troop Master. So they're not within half an inch of one of their teammates. So that means only this guy is going to get to punch the Troop Master, and he's not going to be able to kill the Troop Master. And so then, let's say they get lucky and let's say they manage to kill the 5 troops. Hopefully 1's left alive, 2's left alive, who knows how it goes. But my big killing unit is still left alive, which means that now I can activate him and he can do what he does best, which is whiff spectacularly. It isn't just troops you can use. Of course, vehicles can be really important, and vehicles have a large surface area to base with. So in this example, really much the same, but I could use my Star Weaver to come right in here and base across. And with that, I'm going to be basing these models here. These guys can only pile in closer to here. They're still not going to be able to get within half an inch of half an inch, etc. And this guy's there. So that's also something just to think about. Using your models, especially your vehicles, just to try and base as many as you can. And in general, I think trying to use your units to base and prevent movement is a really effective tool. So it's definitely something to bear in mind. Okay, got one more example to go through. It's a bit more situational, but at the same time, I would say he isn't restricted just to the interrupt. It's quite good practice to get into, I think, when you have 2 units charging 1 unit. First of all, you need to have caused some damage to them. So you could try and do some plink shots, shuriken pistols, whatever. You want them to have a wounded model. Then on top of that, you want to be able to have access to that wounded model when you're charging. So in this case, he's on the end. Think about games you've played. Quite often they will be stringing out models to cover objectives, to screen out, etc. And they take the wound from one end to the other. So this will happen more often than you think. It's just something you want to try and get into the habit of thinking about. Because actually, that's a bit of a mistake our opponent has made. So when we're charging, we're going to charge with both of our units. We know that these guys aren't going to do the job. We're a bit worried about this guy doing the job. We want to charge with both. But at the same time, we're worried that we fight with one and then the remaining interrupt and kill the unit that hasn't fought. It happens a lot, doesn't it? We go into these big tanky units. We need 2 to do the job, but they manage to interrupt and kill the other unit, and it sucks. So can we get around that? Well, I've got good news for you, everyone. Yes, you can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge in my 2 units. In goes this guy on his own. He's going to make sure he's only within 1 inch of the injured guy. Then I'm going to charge this unit in. And again, they're only going to be within engagement range of this guy. They are making sure they are outside of 1 inch there. Have you worked out where this is going? Well, I am going to trigger whoever I want. And then let's say it's these guys. Okay, they're hitting on 3s, wounding on 5s with blades. It's not going to go that great. Okay, then when I kill someone, who do they have to remove? Well, they have to kill the injured guy. He is now dead. So what does that mean? Let's say I've killed one guy. Well, that means if they were to interrupt, they can no longer interrupt here, because remember, you can only activate them if they made a charge move or if they are within engagement range, which they are most definitely not. So it now means that whoever else I've got, so if I fought here, he can now activate, go in and fight. I'm not worried about punchback. It obviously requires you to think about your positioning, making sure you've got the ability to go 3 inches, or in the case of Twilight Harlequins, 5 inches, to get to the rest of the models. So, I wouldn't have wanted these guys strung back over here. Maybe I could have been here just 1.1 inch away, those sorts of things. It's just about having clear intent with your opponent and making sure they understand what you're doing, because they can't really do anything about it. So despite that all, I think this is a really effective way of going about punching but not getting punched back, and it's probably something we don't really think about so often. So yeah, definitely try and give that a go. And maybe if you want, just do what I've done here, just get some models out and just go through the motions. But if you have a practice game and you go in with the mindset of, I wonder if I can find these situations, as you practice more, it will become a bit easier. So there we have it. Hopefully this video got you thinking a bit more how to use the interrupt stratagem, and then also how to avoid the interrupt stratagem. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.